Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today I have a very special interview. This is one of Media Molecule's co-founders, Alex Evans. I just gotta say, I am a big fan of LittleBigPlanet. I've been playing it since I was 6 years old, and honestly, you're kind of my hero. LittleBigPlanet got me into programming many years later, something that I never thought would have happened, but it happened, and I'm so very grateful for it. But yeah, go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, hello, I'm Alex, and as you said, I was one of the co-founders of Media Molecule. I was basically the technical director who did graphics, sound, engine, online stuff, but didn't do any gameplay because I'm absolutely awful at playing LittleBigPlanet. And I'm an awful gamer, actually. I'm just terrible at playing all games. So anyone who's ever seen me demonstrate LittleBigPlanet or Dreams or any other Media Molecule game knows that I suck at playing. So I did everything that wasn't everything technical that wasn't gameplay, basically. That's my role at Media Molecule, I guess.
Awesome. And of course, this channel is dedicated to LittleBigPlanet, and there are others which post a lot of content related to it. But how does it feel knowing that there is still a community over something you worked on such a long time ago? And did you imagine that there would still be a following?
No, it's amazing. And I mean, to be honest, I probably know a tiny fraction of what you do about LittleBigPlanet as a result, because I feel like, certainly for me, LittleBigPlanet was this incredibly intense period of my life, you know, making it and building the company and then building the game. And then weirdly, like after we finished LittleBigPlanet 2, it was like seeing your kid go off to school, right? Like it grew up and it went on to LittleBigPlanet 3 with Sumo, and it sort of evolved. And for example, I follow it now as a fan as much as someone who is involved with it. It's a very strange kind of feeling. And so gradually LittleBigPlanet has morphed into this thing that's kind of at arm's length for me, if you like, from back in the day when it was, you know, every day I'd wake up in the morning and all I could think about was LittleBigPlanet because that's what we were building. So it's my relationship with LittleBigPlanet has changed over the years, and I think it's incredible that it's still going strong and people still love it. I went back and played a few years ago now, but I went back and played LittleBigPlanet 1, 2, 3. And I think my heart is still with LittleBigPlanet 1. I think it's so rough around the edges and so kind of janky in some ways, but for me it's the quintessential LittleBigPlanet. But I don't know, you're welcome to disagree, of course, but that for me the first one is still the one that I'm most proud of.
Right. And of course, in building LittleBigPlanet, you know, there was a lot of sentimental value in that. And so one question I'd like to ask you is, what gave you the idea to begin working on games? And what would you say are the biggest inspirations for LittleBigPlanet?
Oh, well, obviously I was just one member of a team, but we always used to say, and I really believe this, that like we all had our thumbprint on it, right? So like the look of LittleBigPlanet, the sound of it, and the way it feels and the way it plays was very much a product of the people. And for me, I was massively into kind of miniature rendering styles. So any way that I could make miniature worlds come to life. But your question kind of goes all the way back to how did I get into games in the first place? So trying to do a very, very fast speed run. As a teenager, I was into coding. The demo scene is this kind of mostly European kind of subculture that's still going to this day, where basically kids would, pre-internet more or less, on BBSs and dial-up, you know, modems, would make these little programs that are basically music videos but coded. So like, you know, running on a home computer. And so the demo scene was how I got into coding, like learning how to code music and how to code graphics. And I sent that as a kind of resume, if you like, to Bullfrog, which is a game company that was famous for games like Populous and Theme Park. And at the time, I think they were working on a game called Dungeon Keeper. And I was at high school and I applied for a summer job, basically, and I sent my demos as a disc. And that's what I always say to people, is like, if you want to get into games, the best thing you can do is make something. It doesn't matter if it's not professional, because no one expects you to be a professional when you're young or if you haven't got qualifications, but just make something. So I put everything I'd ever made onto this disc and sent it in. And they gave me a summer job. And I met Mark Healy, one of the co-founders of Media Molecule. And actually I met Siobhan, I think, that summer as well. So I met a ton of people who ended up being at Media Molecule way back when I was a teenager. And then I followed them through Bullfrog, many of the people from Bullfrog went to Lionhead, which made Black and White and Fable. And then from Lionhead, a small group of us left, not all from Lionhead, but many of the founders of Media Molecule came from Lionhead. And so then we made LittleBigPlanet, and the five of us sitting around the table, we were trying to figure out what we were going to make. And we just knew that it had to be, we didn't even know the word user-generated content. That wasn't a thing back then. I think we unironically referenced MySpace in the pitch that we made for LittleBigPlanet, but we made the Yellowhead prototype, which you can find online, it's well known. And we were combining all of our interests. So Dave was into physics and physics-based platforming. I was into kind of sketchy, small-scale rendering. Kareem had this kind of fairy tale angle, and Mark brought the English Country Garden. So very quickly over, the first year or so of Media Molecule, the English Country Garden scene was probably the first one that was realized and suddenly feels like you can recognize it today in those early prototypes and through to LittleBigPlanet 1. So it was just a product of not just me, but all of the co-founders, and then the first sort of 20 people at Media Molecule really made LittleBigPlanet 1.
Right. It wasn't just, one central idea from one person, such as yourself, right, that built it. It was, the collaboration, and that's what LittleBigPlanet is all about. Yeah, of course. And there's a lot of speculation about LittleBigPlanet potentially coming to other platforms early in development. Did these rumors have any merit?
You mean in the early days of LittleBigPlanet? No. So I can put those to bed completely. There was one funny day when Mark was working on his Commodore 64 version of LittleBigPlanet, which was, he had a physical Commodore 64 and a little trolley that he would bring back, which is an old 8-bit 1980s computer that he learned to code on. And we teased our Sony producers who came down from Liverpool, where they were based, to see what we were working on, make sure their money was being well spent. And we said, we've got LittleBigPlanet running on a second platform, and wheeled out this Commodore 64. And then their faces had drained, they'd gone white as a sheet, but then they realized we were joking. So the reason I can put the rumors to bed actually is because I had a strategy, and this was actually, I think it was driven by me, but I think we all agreed on it. But basically the idea was, we all experienced games industry people, and I knew how hard it was to make a cross-platform title and get a publishing deal and get noticed and all those other aspects, kind of the business side of things. And we decided that we were going to go after a platform holder. So that basically narrowed the field down to Nintendo, Microsoft, or Sony. And we were going to make a first-party title. For those of you listening who don't know what a first-party title is, the idea is you might be an independent studio, as Media Molecule was, but you make a game that's exclusively for one platform, and in return, that platform holder might take a bigger risk on you. They might make a more out there title at the time, anyway, back in the day, because they felt that would sell consoles. Like ultimately, PlayStation wanted to have games that were unique to PlayStation, so that they could sell more PlayStations. And for us, what was amazing about that is that we were effectively a small fish in a slightly smaller pond. We didn't have to be a Call of Duty that was on every platform and every person's home. We just had to be as good as we could be on a platform. And to finish that thought as well, it also applies not just on the business side, but on the technical and artistic side. If you've ever done a project, you know that like the biggest projects where you've got no constraints, it's going to be everything. They're the ones that fail. And the ones where you have some constraints, where you're like, I'm only going to do this much, or, in thermo terms, like the thermometer is this big and you cannot go over it.
Scope.
So the scope, right. So doing a single platform immediately scopes the technical ambition, because you don't have to worry about other things. And I don't know if anyone remembers, but the PlayStation 3 was a bizarrely weird platform. Everyone was like, loved to hate it, right? The cell processor and the SPUs, they were called. And very early on in the PlayStation 3, no one really knew how to code for it very well. And it was so strange that the people who had the hardest time were the people making cross-platform games, because the cell itself wasn't difficult to program for. It was just strange. So imagine I'm trying to make a game that's going to work on Xbox, and PlayStation and PC and Nintendo, whatever, you have to make it work on this weird PlayStation thing and all of the other ones. That's really hard. But we were really lucky because we're like, well, we're going to focus on one platform. Ended up being Sony. And so we literally got the manuals on our first day at the office, for the PlayStation 3, and we started reading them. And we leaned into all of the weirdnesses because it didn't matter to us. We didn't need to worry about how you do it on another platform. So the rumor, I'm afraid, is nothing but a rumor, because in every single way, we started the company from a business and technical perspective, focusing on the idea of one platform. And it paid off, I think.
Right. And of course, when the game came out, what were your immediate reactions to the community levels? And was it what you had expected?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, this is taking me back. So I think that there was a small scale beta as well. Or there was friends and so I think the biggest shock about the community, because clearly the answer to that question is the community astounded us repeatedly over the years and in new ways, right? As LittleBigPlanet has become an older thing, and there have been problems and dramas and servers and I don't know what else. I've not been intimately involved for years, but the community reinvents itself at each time there's new problems and surmounts new hurdles. So the times that I can talk about are the early days. And I remember we did this friends and family beta, which was basically friends of us and PlayStation employees, basically. And it was to test the servers. It wasn't really to test if the game was good or not. It was just to see if it all kind of stuck together. And the levels that were created were awful. I mean, utter shit. And the thing is, we had no idea what the community would be able to make, right? We had no yardstick for what would a good community level be because there weren't any. And so this first beta was a really tense moment for us. And obviously we'd used the tools to build LittleBigPlanet 1 story mode. And it is true that we didn't cheat. LittleBigPlanet 1, the designers really did have to, use the PlayStation controller. We had tools for doing QA to speed up the things like translation into other languages and some audio things that, weren't the backdrops, for example, are pre-made in LittleBigPlanet. So, but everything that could be made on the PlayStation was on the PlayStation. So we believed in the tools. We believed that the actual, creative tools were good, but we'd never seen a community person who wasn't being paid, by the hour to do it.
Right.
And the friends and family beta was awful. The greatest level, and I will never forget, it was just the blank white canvas background. They hadn't even swapped in the background. And then you ran through it horizontally and there was nothing to do. I think there was maybe a spike on its side. There was one peril. And then a cardboard Millennium Falcon came down and some confetti went off, and that was the end of the level. And that was the best level I found, I think, in the first week of the Friends and Family beta. And I was like, oh God, this is going to be painful. Anyway, then we went to the actual beta, alpha, I can't remember what we called it, alpha or beta. And I think within the first week we had calculator, and we had insane things which immediately did things that we had no idea were possible to do in the game. As in the levels already exceeded in terms of fun, in terms of quirkiness, in terms of replayability, in terms of bizarre, crazy contraptions that you could build, already exceeded what we'd built in a week, with a small with a small version of the community. And so at that point, everything changed or at least in my memory. I was like, okay, this is going to be amazing. It's not going to be okay. It's going to be amazing. So that was, yeah. And from then on, the community obviously wowed us in lots of different ways over the years. Yeah.
So as LittleBigPlanet aged, new items were added to the game through DLC. And what I'd like to know is which one of them was your favorite, and do you think that they greatly expanded what people were able to do in the game?
Gosh, that is a good question. I mean, undoubtedly they did. I remember it more from the kind of technical choices that we made that are maybe not visible publicly, but DLC was pretty new to us. We were kind of, it was tough releasing the DLC, and gosh, you're bringing back memories of how many years ago is this? I can't even remember what the
16, 17
the year was. Yeah. So some of my memories.
10.
So a big caveat that I'm an old man with a shit memory, so maybe I'll get some of this wrong. But one of the things that was really tricky I'm going to give a lot of answers that are kind of technical, so maybe some of your audience will enjoy this, and some of it will want more of a gameplay-based answer. But my lens through Little Big Planet is very much through the code and how it works. So early on in Little Big Planet, we made this decision that there would be like developer assets, which were on the Blu-ray, and yes, downloaded. And then there would be like user-generated content assets, and the idea would be that you wouldn't have to re-download, an asset if it was a developer asset. And of course, that made DLC kind of tricky because we had to be very careful that basically we had to release a patch to the game to release all of the assets for the DLC before the DLC came out. And then, because if someone made a level using like the Paintinator or like some tool or some new feature that was added in DLC, anyone who then played that, we had these big debates back and forth. And I don't even remember who was on what side of the debate, but it was just like, what should be allowed, what should be free if someone makes a level using assets from a DLC pack that they bought, and then, all of that stuff. And we hadn't really thought that through because this was all new. Like no one had ever done DLC, let alone DLC and UGC. Like bear in mind the PlayStation 3 was new. It was the first PlayStation with a significant amount of DLC. On the PlayStation side, the PlayStation Store team were just figuring this stuff out as well. So everything was experimental. Imagine building all this stuff and you don't know what the right answer is, and there's no point of reference. And so we made all these technical choices, some of them, and some marketing choices and price choices, and we were just, with the help of our friends and Sony and everyone else, we were doing our best, but we were basically just making stuff up as we went along. And some of those decisions were made, technical decisions made like stuff really hard. But I do remember the Paintinator was a huge deal. I think that was probably the most important thing. And then I think the costumes took us all by surprise. And now it's kind of obvious because skins are a thing. But back then, again, it wasn't as common. And the sort of popularity and loyalty that people had to particular costume pieces and it was like took me by surprise. Maybe it didn't take my colleagues by surprise, but I loved the spaceman costume. That was my favorite costume. And so I think that the Paintinator was DLC, wasn't it? God, I can't even remember now. Yeah, it was.
Metal Gear Solid.
I think that was, yeah, the MGS pack. Yeah, so I think I'm going to go with the MGS pack as it's early, but that's all my answers are going to skew to the early days. But MGS pack was massive, especially because I think it was the first big one that we did coming out of the game, out of shipping the game. And one of the things you'll learn if you go into games is like, I think that the perception is that you know what the game's going to be and then you make it and then you ship it, but that's not what happens at all. Like you have a ton of ideas. It's like a big smorgasbord of stuff, and you put them together, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work together. Like peanut butter and jelly. Okay, great, that was a great idea. And it's like, gravy and bananas. Okay, that's a terrible idea, so I'm not going to do that. And like you don't know until what ends up happening. And there's this great website called The Cutting Room Floor, which is all about discovering like old bits of games that were like cut out. So when you finish a game like Little Big Planet 1, you haven't really finished. What you've got is like tons and tons of half-finished ideas that didn't make it into the final game. And Metal Gear Solid was our chance, even though we were exhausted, to like pick up some of the best bits of those ideas that hadn't quite made it into the first release of the game, and then fashion them around such an incredible IP as, Metal Gear Solid was the first game on PlayStation, I think, that I got like properly addicted to, like I actually completed. And bear in mind, I'm saying that as a non-gamer. Like as I said earlier, I suck at playing games, but I have a real soft spot for Metal Gear. And I met Kojima shortly after that came out. He was just in the UK. And I went up to him and I was about to say like hello, and he said, "Hello, I'm Hideo Kojima." And I was like, "I know." My response was, "I know who you are." But yeah, it was he was very gracious, and it was very fun to demonstrate the game to him. And like I remember trying to play the game with him, for him, in a demo very early on, and I think I was quite ill that day, so I was like stressing out. And also Japanese consoles have like circle and cross are swapped for menus as well. I seem to remember. So I was playing on a Japanese version of the game. I kept pressing X to proceed, and in fact I was cancelling, and it was just like, it was the worst demo ever. But he was very nice about it. So yeah. Yeah. And of course, in games there are ideas that will work and don't work. I mean,
you've probably heard of Elden Ring, correct? From software. Yeah. So I'm actually a tool developer in the modding community, and I make tools for NavMesh and icon stuff and all sorts of stuff, model stuff mainly. And I have seen so much in my time being a part of development teams, mod development teams. Of course, I was a game developer at my previous contract job, but just being a modding tool developer, we see a lot of things, especially with map design, that don't necessarily work all the time. Just like accents and details. And on the topic of how that relates to LittleBigPlanet, glitches, of course, are going to occur. So what would you describe as the funniest glitch you saw during the game's development?
Gosh, there's a few that spring to mind. I don't know about funniest, but I'll give you one of the most stressful ones, and one of the ones that made me happy because I knew it was coming. And then, so the infinite layer glitch, obviously, really early on, exploited the fact that originally LittleBigPlanet was like completely free in Z. Like you could literally run in and out like analog style. Like there were no layers. And then later on we added layers, but we had loads of layers. This is back to the creative constraints thing, right? And then later on we had like 3 layers, and I think we added thin layers after that. And so like so in terms of the code, it wasn't beautifully architected around the way that you see LittleBigPlanet like now. It was actually like a lot of it was not layer driven. So glitches like the infinite layer, deep levels and stuff, were exploiting the fact that actually the game had these capabilities, and we'd added these constraints because we found them useful creatively for ourselves, and then ultimately it made the tools easier to use. So that was one of the ones that, like, I guess we knew it was coming, but that was genuinely bugs being exploited, and it was really creative how good they were. So then the glitch that most stressed me out, but which had a lovely solution by the community, so kind of like a happy ending thanks to community members, was, I don't know if this glitch has a name, your Sackboy could get electrified, and I think it's on one frame after you spawn, you could be, if someone was spamming the make electric thing, you could actually make the actual Sackboy electric, which means that you'd then die immediately on the next frame. So basically a troll could invite you into their pod or into a level and basically be spamming their like make electric button just over where you spawn. And then if they catch that frame where you spawn, you, because for anyone interested in the technical things, I believe that for one frame Sackboy wasn't actually marked as a Sackboy. So I think on the first frame that you spawn, you're just some other kind of object type. So then you could actually electrify it, and then you would instantly die. And the horrifying thing about this is that was then saved into your costume. So if you then went back to your pod, you would infinitely spawn and die in your pod, and you'd never be able to play the game, and until we patched it. However, some enterprising community member realized that they could use the same hack to unelectrify. So they would invite people who were affected by this into their pod, and they would unelectrify you on the first frame and then free you. So there was this like little community service thing going on where basically if you got affected by this glitch, you could also be, just as there were black hats kind of murdering you, there were white hats who were curing you. And to use a hacker analogy, that was a very stressful glitch. And then I think there were glitches to do more with like server stuff and crown stealing and all of that stuff. I mean, I found that stuff stressful as well, but it had less of it didn't even have a kind of redeeming story to it. So they're less interesting. They're just horrifying moments of my life that I don't really want to relive. But yeah.
What would you say was the hardest part to develop in LittleBigPlanet?
Well, that's a very good question. I think I'm just deciding what story to tell here.
Right.
I don't think there was any particularly standout. I think finishing it was hard. I think just shipping it, growing a company, doing all of that on a new platform, blah, blah, blah. All of that was hard. So LittleBigPlanet in general was a very rewarding but also extremely difficult period of, I don't remember, but one thing. So basically, one thing that was tricky was that PlayStation Network was new, PlayStation 3 was new, LittleBigPlanet was new, Company was new, the idea of user-only content was pretty new, certainly in the game, so on and so forth. So everything was new. So basically, if you can imagine, it's like fog of war. It's like you're constantly surrounded by fog of war, and every aspect of LittleBigPlanet, we didn't really know what was lying just in front of us, and we just like blindly and bravely and stupidly sometimes just like plowed forwards. And one of the ones that was most tricky was that when you had a disagreement, and it's not that the other person was in bad faith or that they were wrong. It's just that you're both in the fog of war and you have a disagreement. And you're like, where do you go? And at the time, and I've shared this with like developer friends, but I think it's long enough ago that it no longer relates at all to anything to do with what goes on. So it's old enough history that I can recount the story. It's to do with servers. And so basically we were an unknown studio to Sony, like we experienced people, but we had never shipped a game. And they had an online technology group that had created, and they were, by the way, the OTG, as I know, were amazing through the years of, I have to give them a shout out. They basically maintained the LittleBigPlanet servers all the way through 1, 2, 3 and beyond. They're an amazing group. And they did a lot of selfless work, like maintaining this thing. But at the earliest version of OTG, they hadn't shipped a lot of games either online. And the best game they'd shipped, I believe, was MLB. Major League Baseball had an online server. And so they said to us, we would like you to use the code of MLB online, whatever it was called at the time, as the starting point for LittleBigPlanet servers. And I was like, okay, fine. Can I have the code? And it's like, no, the code is too complicated for you to compile. So we will hold on to the code in the servers, and we will hold on to the database, and you will just get an API that you can call from the PlayStation to do whatever you need to do. And it's like, well, LittleBigPlanet's not really very much like a Major League Baseball game. So how's that going to work? And they're like, well, you'll just have to figure it out. And we won't change any of the databases, and we won't change any of the tables. So we had to basically bend LittleBigPlanet 1 to fit into pretending essentially to be MLB. I can't remember the exact details beyond the fact that it was insane. Like this didn't last. But at the starting point in the fog of war, they were like, oh, online's hard. You're a new developer. You're not going there. You can use what we already have that we know works. And I just knew it was a disaster waiting to happen. And now Naughty Dog is going to enter the story, into the chat. Again, I hope this is long enough ago that it doesn't matter. So I was getting more and more frustrated with Sony. And at the time I was naive and I didn't understand their motivations. And I was like, this is never going to work. And the game's going to fall over on day one because it just doesn't match. And at the time, there's this new thing called Amazon Web Services, or AWS, which at the time was brand new. Like literally, I think they had only S3 and EC2. So if anyone knows about that, there was 2 services on AWS. I think there's probably like 400 now. AWS was this shiny new thing. And I went to E3 and I met up with my friend Christoph, who at the time was a co-president of Naughty Dog. And I was like, have you heard about this AWS thing? And he was working on Uncharted 1 at the time, I think. And I was like, have you heard of, maybe it was Uncharted 2, but I think it was Uncharted 1. And I was like, have you heard about AWS? It's amazing. You can just like, with a credit card, you can sign up and get a server, and then you can like run some stuff on it. And then there's this thing called S3 and you can put files in it. And I remember just saying, I was very excited about it. And so I told him about this. And then I went back to London and Sony won the argument. They were basically like, no, you're going to have to ship with MLB. So I started work on the LittleBigPlanet servers AWS edition secretly, skunkworks. And I made them so that we had the MLB servers, and then we had, which were run by Sony, and then we had the AWS ones that were completely skunkworks. And but I knew that when we shipped on day one, it would be the official legit servers. At which point, Uncharted shipped before us. And Christoph rang me up and went, hey, thanks for the AWS tip. What did you do for AWS in the end? How did you solve this problem? And I was like, oh, I didn't do it. We're going with the Sony solution. And he said, oh, well, I did it. And our game, uses AWS. And so I think they ended up taking the crown as the first PlayStation game that ran on AWS. So that was actually very crucial to the end of the story. So now we come to the final chapter of the story. The LittleBigPlanet 1 came out, and I don't remember the exact timing, but within a day or two, the MLB servers were overloaded. And it wasn't their fault, it's just that LittleBigPlanet and MLB are very different. And so the car crash that I saw coming happened, and they were trying to fix it. And so I said, well, just so you know, guys, I've actually got the skunkworks server that I wrote, and it's running on AWS. But I know that you don't officially support AWS, but I've heard that Naughty Dog are running a game in production on AWS. So maybe I can take some of their learnings and you can bless it, and we can switch the LittleBigPlanet servers over from the MLB ones to the AWS ones. And thanks to Naughty Dog blazing the trail, because the servers were crashing, they switched it over to AWS, and that began a long story called AlexDB, and the poor old OTG in Sony had to end up maintaining AlexDB for many years, which I think is probably going to cause a shiver down their spines. But so I apologize for that. But it was a necessary evil, and it got LittleBigPlanet to run through 1 and 2, and I think even 3. But yeah, so that was it. There you go. That's the story I've not shared in that much detail before. But it was to summarize, LittleBigPlanet was hard because everything was new, and it was like fog of war, and everyone was doing their best to make the best decision they could. And every now and then we'd end up colliding with pits of lava or each other, and as we stumbled around. And that was one of the examples that made it hard. But shipping a client update, I touched on earlier, like we were making decisions about developer assets versus user-generated content assets. And basically you had to patch LittleBigPlanet every time you wanted to release new DLC. So because it was developer content, because there was only a path for new developer content, including DLC, could only go through the patching system. So basically what would happen is you would patch LittleBigPlanet with the new DLC, or bug fixes and mitigations for problems. And I'll get to that, and that's why this is relevant. And again, this is ancient history, and this is like LittleBigPlanet 1 era. So it may have changed, I may be wrong with all of those caveats. At the time of LittleBigPlanet 1, we had to patch the game to do any kind of change, whether it was a bug fix or a new DLC. And then the actual DLC itself was just unlocking something on the store. Basically, when the day it released, you'd say, right, okay, this content is allowed to be used now, because we know that we've pushed out the patch. The problem is that patching, and I actually admire PlayStation for this, the QA process and the patching process is very full on. Like, so PlayStation has a big, long QA process, and you have to get in line behind all of the games that come out on PlayStation, not just first party. And there's lots of money involved in localization and testing. Basically, releasing a patch is not a small thing. It involves hundreds of people around the world, lots of money being spent. It's a big deal. And so that decision we made that every single asset is a developer asset meant that LittleBigPlanet had to be patched every time we did a new costume, every time we did a tiny, tiny thing. And it just got more and more and more costly in terms of like how long it took to put out a small patch. So for example, I'm sure that the heart glitch problems that will be running on the PlayStation 3 inside the PISH VM could have been mitigated. But by the time those things were happening, I imagine that the people who knew the code, like me, had long gone, right? They weren't around to fix the code. And worse, the appetite to send out a really expensive patch costing a lot of money was probably less and less and less over time. So which I'm saying is like, fixing these things was technically possible, but in practice, in reality, there maybe wasn't the manpower or the money available or the time available to actually fix it. And that's the thing that's very sad. And if I had my time again, I would, if the fog of war lifted and I could see everything with the benefit of hindsight, you might build a system where it was either easier to hand over to the community. And I know you've been trailering and hinting at the fact that you've done incredible decompilation and reverse engineering, archiving, and I know that there's various efforts. And I wish in hindsight that we'd made those efforts easier. But the culture, certainly within PlayStation, was that it was very much a walled garden, and that like the idea that you would build for the future, for a community future, for an open source, even where the servers might be open source, that was not even like back in 15 years ago. Within PlayStation, within the bubble of PlayStation, that was like an alien concept. I think these days it's probably very, very different. But so if I had my hindsight 2020, but I don't think I would have won that battle if I tried. Like if I tried 15 years ago and said, hey, we should make the servers in such a way that anyone can run them, I just would have been shut down. There's no way that would have I would have won that battle. But I wish I'd tried harder, but that's what it is.
Right, right. And of course, the patching system, to refresh your memory a little bit, that worked through FARC files, right? You had all the patches, the version number in the FARC file as separate FARCs, and then you had, I believe, native code in the compile deboot. Of course, it would have worked if it wasn't compiled as well. That took all the patch FARCs and basically concatenated them together into a single FARC. You must have had a native method for combining a bunch of FARC files.
Yeah.
And about that, this is something. It's a little bit nerdy. As a programmer, I've always kind of wondered about some of the naming conventions with, for example, the FAR magic bytes. FAR 3, FAR 4, and FARC. But I've also wondered about two things in particular: big fart and little fart. Can you explain the meaning behind those naming conventions for the magic bytes and the profile naming conventions?
I mean, I was probably being silly at the time. I think far, it was just file archive, but then it sounded a bit rude, so I probably went with it. It was childish. It's definitely the vibe. I remember some of the naming around so the code files. You mentioned you'd made something that took fish VM files. So the guy who made all of that was called Paul Holden, who's a very brilliant engineer, and went on to work at, for example, on Kubernetes at Google Cloud. So he became a very illustrious engineer. But we wrote COD files because they were code, so we had .cod extension, and we were like, well, what processes COD? And we decided it was a fishmonger. The compiler was called. Yeah, the compiler was called Fishmonger, and then the Fishmonger turned COD into fish fingers. So the compiled files that you would have been decompiling were called FFs for Fishfinger. As for the file archive, so I vaguely remember that. So LittleBigPlanet works by something called a content addressable store, which actually became more and more popular over time. So we were trailblazing that one a little bit. It's an old idea from the 70s, but it became popular more and more in game development. And the idea is that you name a file by its own hash. So you take a SHA1 hash of a file's contents. And the nice thing about that is it never changes. Like once you have a file, any version of any file, you compute its hash and it's named that. And then you can find it on the server by its hash. And it's called an immutable object store. And basically you have thousands and thousands of these hashes, and any given sort of costume or pack or DLC pack or level or collectible item, collectible will be a collection of these small files, and you need to sort of glob them together into an archive. And because this notion of hash stress storage didn't exist on PlayStation at the time, we had to basically roll out all our own tools. Again, that fog of war thing. So that's how the file archive came about. It's we had a needs must. It was just a necessity. We had to be able to bundle these things together. And then patching at the time was very rudimentary. So PlayStation 4 introduced a much better patching system at the operating system level. But as far as I vaguely remember, the PlayStation 3 was pretty crude. And so we sort of were ahead of the curve in the sense that we built a game that was able to create these overlays, as you mentioned, and kind of combine them together and overlay a mixture of old and new content and downloaded content from all these different sources, and was able to then kind of re-index and combine them. And later on, similar ideas were included into the PlayStation 4 and 5 SDKs. But at the time of PlayStation 3, we were fairly at the edge of how you did that stuff. But I'm afraid I don't remember the big FARC and little FARC. I do remember that I have a feeling it was to do with a whole other pile of shenanigans. I'll tell you one more surprisingly difficult part of LittleBigPlanet was the save data. So on PlayStation, again, I'm going to get some of this wrong because it's a long time ago, but there was this notion of game data and save data. And save data was the thing that used to go onto memory cards and was associated with your player profile and had various advantages. And the obvious place to put your levels and your creations was in your save data. However, save data had this incredibly convoluted API to use it. and it was incredibly slow, and no one at PlayStation could really explain why. And I remember being bitten by the bug, which is that the QA for a game on PlayStation 3 was that if they ejected the disc, you had to shut the game down within 10 seconds, which I think is fine. And so we'd have to struggle to make the game shut down gracefully within 10 seconds. But there was another rule written by somebody else that said, if you quit the game, you have to save data, any profile changes or any important changes to the user. And then someone else had written that if you were playing multiplayer with 4 people plugged in, you also had to do it for all people who were logged in. And then I discovered that it took 3 seconds, between 2.5 and 3 seconds, to simply open and then close and do nothing to the save data. So I wrote to them and I said, you do realize that you have a rule that says it's got to be done within 10 seconds, which is fine. It's got to be for all players up to 4, which is fine. And did you know that your API is so slow that it takes 3 seconds to do nothing, which is 3 times 4, which is 12 seconds, which is more than 10 seconds. So we fail your 10-second rule, or we fail your saving rule. What are we going to do? And by the way, I want to do more than nothing. I want to save all of your levels. You might have, a whole moon's worth of levels. And basically they said, we have no solution for you. And so we had to switch from save data to game data and store all of your creations in the game data, which was larger and faster and easier to use, but wasn't associated to a user account. So then we had to add export and various other things. And the little farks and big farks were to do with which API you had to use. And so basically the save data was to do with exporting to USB sticks and that sort of stuff. And that would be a little fark. And then there were big farks I made, which is to do with game data. And then there were even bigger farks, which are the ones that were built at Media Molecule and used for DLC. So there were many types of fark, and they're all a weird side effect of the strange PlayStation 3 storage architecture, which was an accident of probably dating back to PlayStation 1, but I don't know how any of that worked. So there you go. There's a bit of history.
So I wanted to ask you, do you miss the old Media Molecule crew still? You still miss them?
Oh, very much. I mean, I don't work there anymore. So I joke that I've moved on from games, and I don't miss some parts of the game industry. Certainly, Griefers is one of the things I don't miss. But I absolutely miss the people, the good people in the community, and also the good people in the developers. Like not just Media Molecule, but all of the game developers. There's generally a very lovely crowd, and I miss them enormously. Yeah, absolutely. I still see some of the molecules from time to time. But I miss the people more than the specific place. The specific. I think it's an interesting question. Like things change, right? If you're in a group or a company or a band or anything, it evolves, and I think it's actually healthy to let it evolve. So Media Molecule today is different from the Media Molecule I was at. It's different from the first, before Dreams, and then LittleBigPlanet 2, LittleBigPlanet 1, Tearaway. It evolves, and I think it's okay for it to evolve. And I've learned not to cling to an earlier version of it. So the thing I miss is not Media Molecule itself, because that's evolved. I think the thing that I miss is the people. Yeah.
Do you think Sackboy Big Adventure was a step in the right direction?
I think I have no horse in that race. So I genuinely think, even with LittleBigPlanet 3, as early as LittleBigPlanet 3, so I think it's a naming thing. I remember at the time thinking, I'm fine with there being Sackboy games that don't have UGC, but I think I wish there was a new LittleBigPlanet game. As a fan, not as a game developer anymore, I wish there was a new LittleBigPlanet game that had all of the kind of play, create, share aspects, and with Sackboy as well. And so no, I don't think Sackboy as a standalone character in his or her own game is a bad thing at all. And I don't have, I think it was a lovingly crafted game, as with all games. A lot of love goes into them. And yeah, I don't feel like I have a horse in the race. And I was going to say, even with LittleBigPlanet 3, I felt like it would never be my place to pass judgment. There were brilliant things in there, and there were things that I would have done differently, but who cares? Because I didn't do it. Anything that you don't work on, I don't think you have a chance to say how you would have done it, because it's you weren't there and you didn't actually make it. So I can say how I'd make things differently on LBP 1 and 2 because I was there, and those are my mistakes to own, or my triumphs to own. But But for those other things, I think they're brilliant and lovingly made by great people. I do wish there was a new Little Big Planet game with play, create, and share in it. I'd love to play that beyond just Sackboy.
Yeah. If there was one thing you could change about Dreams, what would it be?
I think we should have had a character like Sackboy. I think that I don't know whether it would be Sackboy, but I would have loved to see. And this is hindsight, it's 2020. But I think that Sackboy is a huge part of Little Big Planet. You can't. I think you can take Sackboy out of. How do I put it? I changed my mind on Dreams. Sometimes I think that it would have been better as a tool on PC and not as a PlayStation game. But then I don't think it would have ever existed. I don't think it would have come out in the first place. So then I think, well, no, okay. How could I have, been happier with how it came out on PlayStation? I think the answer is I wish it had been more of a gamey game. I wish it had more character to it. And I think that Sackboy is what gave us that in Little Big Planet. And I think Dreams lacked that. But that's just my 2 cents. That's me trying to figure out after the fact what I would have changed. I'm very proud of the technical aspects of Dreams. I think that Dreams is a wonderful thing in itself. It's just a thing that doesn't feel like a particularly PlayStation game. It's a wonderful anomaly, and people look at it and go, how does this exist? And I have to say, I don't know how it exists. I'm very happy that it does, but it was a fish out of water a little bit.
Right. And regarding Tearaway, as a programmer, I've been fascinated about I'm GUI, and I was surprised to hear it was created for Tearaway. Was it intended to be an open source project from the very start?
So that's the creation of a lovely man called Omar Cornu, who you should ask him on Twitter. I'm sure he'll tell you the full history. But the idea of immediate mode GUI, I'm GUIs, came from his previous job at Q Games, which is also an awesome studio. And so that was like the idea of an immediate mode GUI, as opposed to the one that everyone now knows as Dear I Am GUI, the one that Omar made. And so he sort of took those ideas and kind of coalesced them into something just for Tearaway. It wasn't for open source, but it was such a useful tool, and we were using it so much that at some point, I think he was thinking of leaving Media Molecule at that point anyway, and he said, can I please take those ideas that I did and redo the code, but carrying it forward as an open source project. Especially given the ideas predated Media Molecule, we said, of course it can, and we actually were sponsoring it for a while. Media Molecule sponsored it as a project for a while. So I love the fact that it was able to kind of flourish outside of Media Molecule, because we found it incredibly useful, and Omar has kind of tended and curated that garden for years, which I think is wonderful. And if you're out there using it and you work at a company that's using it, consider sponsoring the project, because I think it's an enormously valuable bit of infrastructure, and there's not enough people kind of giving Omar the love he deserves.
Right. Why were there performance issues with the Freezatron tool? Is it because of graphically intensive shaders and animations used for the ice? How are there network problems pertaining to the ice effects and stuff? Really curious about that.
I don't remember the shaders being particularly affected. So, I mean, I can hypothesize. The Little Big Planet is a lockstep architecture where basically every game tick has to run deterministically on every person who's playing the game together. And potentially there might be something about ice and frozen objects that makes the game tick itself take too long, which means that then maybe it would judder or slow down, or then the connection to other players would start lagging. But I know that it doesn't send any traffic, network traffic in and of itself. And I know that the shaders aren't particularly horrendous. So there must be some other reason, but I don't actually know. It'll be some bizarre, crazy combination of events, So,
ladies and gentlemen, that was Alex Evans, co-founder of Media Molecule. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on here and to delve into the surface level aspects of the game, the history, and of course the technical aspects. I love that stuff, being a programmer, working with Elden Ring and all sorts of stuff. So it's good sauce, and hopefully the audience has been has gained some valuable insight into how Little Big Planet was made, and of course all the intricacies behind the history at Media Molecule, as well as just being involved with the game. So again, absolute pleasure. And we hope to, maybe have you on again for a part 2. So yeah, guys, stay tuned for more content in the future. We'll have more interviews coming in the next few weeks. All right, peace.